10 seconds. All right. So let me hear from our good friend Elliot here. Like, what's the logical end game if every time we keep progressing to a point Chris just made, society as a whole doesn't progress? The top of society progresses way faster than the bottom parts of society, which is his general argument. What's the logical conclusion to that?
What I took from it is that if we don't address the problem, we're going to get to a point where it breaks the nation apart, or it's going to lead to a point where it's not fixable.
Yeah, there's no solution eventually.
Yeah.
Right? The point in there that eventually there'll be no statesmanship, politics, no charity, no education. We won't be able to address the fact that at the very top of society, all of the wealth is consolidated, and at the bottom of society, all of the labor of the work is consolidated. Yes, Luis?
What I was discussing with Chavez and Desiree was that the idea of which capitalism is built upon, of no regulations and just competition in producing materials, that itself produces poverty. Yeah, the very nature of capitalism, according to George, and if you go down the line of a very unregulated laissez-faire capitalism, that system, according to George, in and of itself is going to keep creating poverty in greater and greater numbers. As the rich keep using their money to get richer, as the resources keep using their resources to consolidate more resources in one place, as these monopolies become super monopolies, then yes, that all the system is doing, to both of your points, is creating more problems, and eventually those problems will be unsolvable and our entire society will collapse. Interesting. Yes, sir?
Sorry to interrupt.
Don't be. Just don't do it ever again.
Is leaving home.
Who?
Beatrice?
Yeah. Bobby. Swing by tomorrow. I'll get your stuff. So, it's a compelling argument because it is a good argument. Because I think George makes a pretty good case that as we've advanced, I heard these guys talking about it, we're looking more and more and more like England, where we have these working classes that are forever working class. That in a sense, you're born into a working class and you die in the working class. So a lot of this comes off of the ideas from a man named Frederick W. Taylor. And this philosophy of, it's the very bottom under the question, under the text of the question, the philosophy of Taylorism. And what Taylorism is taking a very scientific approach to business, to labor, to production. And what we see in the Gilded Age is really this new class that kind of popped up in the Market Revolution. It's become a much bigger deal now, and it's emphasized in the College Board framework. So I suggest you understand how this works. And it was in George's thing as well. That the rich in the Gilded Age, are they doing any actual work?
No.
No, they're just owning. This is the ownership class. The very top of society of this ownership class, who's below them? Management. And it creates a middle class. So you guys aren't wrong. But in the business dynamic, we're not talking about economic classes here. We're talking about business roles. You have the ownership class. Maybe it's a person. Maybe from Thursday's talk, it's a corporation. Maybe it's a board of directors. But they're not doing any actual physical labor. They're not the ones in the factory saying, go do this, go do this, go do this, you're fired, go do this, get the hell out of here. You want a raise? Beat it. And then under this, who do we have? Yeah, the labor. The actual work is being done here. So what Taylor suggests is you break the labor up into tiny fractions, sub-fractions of the actual work to be done. For example, maybe Chris here, I'm not using an actual Gilded Age analogy, I'm using a right now analogy, but Chris used to build cars. What does Chris do under scientific management? Does he still build a whole car?
Yeah. No.
Yes,
We're dividing the work. What does he do?
Yes, sir.
The tires.
Part of the car.
He puts the steering wheel on the car. That's it. So Chris, who used to build a car and used to take him a long time to build this nice, pretty car, now all he's doing is at the very end, slapping the steering wheel in that bad boy. Good work. But now what have we made Chris? What have we made Chris do? We've made him less valuable. We've made him replaceable. Because now if Chris builds a whole car, is that valuable skill? Yeah, that's impressive. if Chris slaps the steering wheel on that bad boy, is he impressive anymore?
No.
He's nothing. You're nothing, sorry. I can find, if this is the Gilded Age, I can find an immigrant from Russia right now off of a boat in Ellis Island who can do that exact same job. Sucks to suck. So what this does, though, is he wants these guys to plan out, to create schedules, to train, and to supervise all of this. And in this working class, all people are doing is one specific task. He does the steering wheel. He puts the tires on. He takes it for a test drive. Somebody puts the seatbelts in. Somebody puts the hood on. It's very, very, very broken down and compartmentalized so that workers are just doing one specific task. But what you've done is you've taken skilled labor, building a car, and you've replaced it with a bunch of unskilled labor. Unskilled labor is more replaceable. Unskilled labor is cheaper. Unskilled labor is more, what else? It's that word you used about the machines. It's more efficient. We can do things faster because we're just worrying about one specific job and one job only. We can manage our time better. We can have people working in shifts all the time. So maybe these 10 are building cars, they go home, and then these 10 are building the same cars, and then these 10 are building the same cars. And you apply that work to everything the Gilded Age is producing: textiles, clothes, steel, locomotives, whatever you want to talk about, it can all be scientifically managed. But the effects of this, a positive effect, you create a management class. You create this new middle class of people that have money, that have time, that are spending money. But all of the positives of the Gilded Age are happening from this line up. They're getting some benefits, they're getting the vast majority of the benefits, but they're doing the work. You create more efficiency, which is good. You're producing more and quickly, but you're making your labor very resentful. Let's use Chris again. Did Chris like his job building a whole car from scratch? Probably. That's a skilled job. He went to a lot of training, a lot of learning, a lot of progress to learn how to build a car. Does he like his job slapping steering wheels on the bad boys? No, there's no joy in that. There's no production in that. There's no feeling of satisfaction, of gratification, of I did something. So yeah, we're producing more. Yeah, it's more efficient. But from the labor perspective on this, there's nothing that's less joyful than just doing this type of work over and over and over again. The production process, according to Taylor, should be divided into very specialized tasks so that each person can just do their task and production can be faster. All work is basically unskilled if you break it down far enough. All work in life is unskilled if you boil it down to the lowest common denominator at some point. And what this does, if you think about it, it takes the next step in Eli Whitney's progress from the market revolution. What was Eli Whitney's big contribution? Interchangeable parts. If one part breaks, you just replace that part. Now it's interchangeable workers. So what we had in the market revolution, which was really revolutionary, was this new factory system where you just have to change a part out and you're good to go. But now it's interchangeable humans. Oh, you don't like your job? Beat it. Oh, you want a raise? I can replace you. Everything is replaceable. And now in our industrial revolution, we have interchangeable parts and interchangeable humans. And so hell yeah, our production's way up. Hell yeah, we're producing way more stuff, amassing more wealth, industrializing the living crap out of our country. But at what cost? At what human cost? It makes work interchangeable, and that's dangerous. That's been the threat right now, where they're saying, oh yeah, all these workers are going to be replaced by robots in the next whoever knows how many years. All right, I'd love to see a robot have to teach Luis Bernal. So, might do a better job. Might do a better job than me.
No, you're a good teacher.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate your approval. It's always good to have approval of a 9-year-old. Now, I want you, with your partner, I have a couple graphs to look at, just to take a minute on the first one. What trend is this identifying? We have 1870, 1880, 1890, 1900. What is the general trend up here in America? What are some conclusions we can draw from this for your next question on the back page about how is labor changing? 1 minute, talk to your partner, go for it. What is evident in this chart? Go for it.
So,
I think that offer
Farmers are getting
So I feel like they say pretty.
About half is working a little working over a fourth.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
And it stays pretty much the same too. Like 53, 52, 54, 53 is like the same thing from a data perspective. All right. So what is the big trend evident in this data? Please, Al Shanae, thank you for raising your hand.
As time progresses, the working class is like staying the same,
Okay. But
and the upper class is increasing.
kind of. What's the bigger trend up here though? Slaney. What's the bigger trend that's present in this infographic?
Well, I was telling Rubia about the farmers slowly
Yes.
decreasing, but you can also tell that the upper class occupation is like growing a bit.
Sure, so our upper class is growing and our farming class is the big thing that is decreasing. We are becoming a less farming nation. Who's pissed off about this? Who? In history? Jefferson. Right, but he started all this. Right? Embargo Act, War of 1812, Market Revolution. See? We are becoming a less agriculture nation and therefore, by its very nature, a more industrial population. Okay, reasonable, reasonable. The next one I think is a little more telling. There's a lot of good data in the next one. So take the same minute with your partner and look at how labor is shifting. How is our labor force changing over time? I got 1870 here, I got 1910 here. Take a minute, talk about with your partner. What do you notice up here? Go for it. Go, go, go. We already talked about that, though. What else do we got?
Agriculture so as the amount of labor has increased significantly by 3 times the amount.
But now, everything is now
Pretty sad it's almost
manufactured and creating those manufacturers.
Cool. So, let me stop you here. Tell me, there are some really, really glaring pieces of data on this board. Christoph, you pointed out a good one. What you got for me?
The labor force increased by 3 times, basically.
The labor force almost triples. The amount of people working goes from 13 million to 37 million. That's ridiculous. Why? Chavez, why? Why is the labor force increasing so much?
I would say because of the increase of commerce, manufacturing, construction.
Okay, that's part of it. There's a whole bunch more jobs. What are we talking?
Now that since Taylorism was kind of introduced, there was more things that people could do, I guess, or simple things that they could do.
Yeah.
So they were able to hire people that didn't have much skill.
Sure. So everybody's a qualified worker if all the work is unskilled. Good point. Good point. Also good point. Talk to me.
Wasn't this a time like for heavy factories, like car companies and like?
No, not yet. Car companies are more than the 1920s.
Alright.
Go. What's the other big thing that motivated this increase in workforce? Yeah, kinda. What? Immigration. Immigration is this huge wave of immigration that we'll spend a lot of time on Thursday. Of all these new immigrants that come to America, and they're all qualified to work because all the work is unskilled. Who else is joining the workforce in this time period? What? No.
Oh.
Kids
Oh.
and women.
Cool.
So we see a ton more child labor, a ton more women labor. So some of the shifts in the workforce are because of what you guys both pointed out, the fact that the work is unskilled and there's more of it, but also the simple fact of immigration has increased significantly, cost of living has increased, so women have to work, kids have to work, and this is why we look at this. We see agriculture drops a ton as a percentage of our economy, and we see a huge increase in manufacturing, construction, and commerce. This looks like graphs of a nation that is industrializing. None of this should be surprising. So the workforce evolves as we see women joining it in great numbers, largely in textile factories, much like they did in the market revolution. That's more of a continuity, like the Lowell girls, but also in garment factories, tobacco factories. And women in general are going to be paid less than half of what men are getting paid in the exact same jobs. So women have a real short amount of benefit in the Gilded Age workforce-wise. In 1870, and then more so by 1910, over a third of factory workers are foreign-born. That is a huge number. 1 in 3 workers in a factory is born in another country. To Eliam's point, a lot in the West Coast, a lot of those immigrants are going to be Chinese. In the East Coast and the Midwest, a lot of them are Eastern European, Southern European, Greek, Russian, Jewish, etc. Immigrants are hired in great numbers because they are very willing to work for less money. So here's this, if you're already replaceable, and I can replace you with an immigrant who's cheaper, you're even more replaceable, if that's possible. You already mean nothing to my company, but if I could actually get rid of you and pay somebody less money, win-win for that bottom line of profit. So looking at just some broad numbers, get your minds around this. The average work week in the industrial workforce is 60 hours. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. People work Monday to Saturday, 10 hours a day. 60 hours a week isn't so bad. Right? I work about 50 to 55 usually. Right? I was here at 6 today. I'll probably leave by about 5. That's 11 hours. Well on my way to 60. Thursday I'll get here at 6. I'll leave at 6. Nice little 12-hour day. Saturday I'll be here from 7 till about 1. It's another 6 hours.
What are you working?
You tell me. Are you working the whole time?
Yeah.
What else do you think I'm doing here? Hanging out with Montes? He doesn't work the whole time. He's just here. I don't know how he feels. I don't know why he gets here so early and doesn't do anything. But the average hourly rate during the Gilded Age is about 10 cents an hour. So you're working 60 hours a week for about $6. Pretty quality amount of time here. $6, which in today's world is really about $100 or so a week, give or take, which is nothing. The conditions are terrible. The equipment is terrible. There's no ventilation. The people that are mining are getting the black lung. People that are working industrial jobs it's very dangerous work. There's no benefits. Oh, you get hurt at work? That sucks. You shouldn't have gotten hurt. You're fired. As opposed to, oh my God, you got hurt at work. You have time off to get better.
It's like today's minimum wage, wouldn't you say?
Way worse. It's way worse than today's minimum wage situation. In 1882, a really bad year in the history of labor, on average, 675 workers die at work every week. Every week!
Every week.
675 workers a week are killed at work. And every one of them, it's like, oh, sorry, next man up. There's no benefits, there's no vacation days, there's no sick leave, there's no retirement, there's no nothing. You work in these jobs until you die. Or you die at work, or you die from hurting yourself at work, or you die from some disease you got because you work. Yeah? Yeah? And kids as young as 5 are working in these factories because they're small, they can fit into small spaces and fix things. And kids make even less money. They're working 12 to 14 hours for about 27 cents or $6.65 in today's money. It's all sorts of bad. I look at this picture. It's a very famous picture of child labor. First thing I notice, what do you think it is? Yeah, they're barefoot. They're working in factories barefoot. There's a really good next cartoon that kind of emphasizes this entire idea, and it's here on the board for you. Alice Nation, lights off me, please. Take a minute, if you could, just to look at the cartoon and try to identify what you see from a point of view standpoint. A minute, please, of quiet. Just looking at the cartoon to figure out what is this cartoonist perspective on industrialization. Take a minute. Maybe just 30 seconds, and I'll let you discuss it. I don't know. I'll talk. All right, take the rest of the time and talk to your partner. Look at me. What do you have going on up here? What is the point of view of this cartoon? What is this cartoon trying to get at? Go for it. Chat it out for me.
Like on plantations and the guys that were with.
No, it's nonsense.
I didn't see like before the plantations. People would argue and slaves.
Because look, they're having fun. What you say?
Wait, when you got a water pump?
Water fountain? To tie down with the docking ship.
Very good. I know, right? Like, what did they hear them saying? Like, kids are having fun in the photo. What did they think I'm a bad person? Those kids, like, they're having a bad time. Like, they're actually having fun in the photo. They're not.
All right, 3 seconds.
Is that this person?
I mean, like, that looks like long.
All right.
Moderate extent.
So, what do you guys notice up here in this cartoon? What is worth pointing out from a point of view perspective? What is this cartoon trying to argue? Santos, talk to us.
Child labor was bad.
And you're better than that. You're better than that.
Yeah, they're exploited.
Okay, exploited is a better word. Thank you, Ruby. Take a shot at it.
What I'm receiving from this picture is pretty much that big companies were so greedy and they were so focused on trying to make more revenue for their own company to make themselves richer, to the point where they just decided to put young children to work without giving them actual proper working conditions or things like that.
Then everything's dominated by this desire for profit and greed.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Charles.
You can argue that it was very abusive. Like, you can see in the photo that he has a lasso.
Or a whip.
Oh yeah, the whip. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's just watching them very carefully.
I think it's go ahead. You something?
Oh, the point of view.
Go ahead.
Isn't it anti-capitalism?
It's anti-greed and capitalism. It's anti this extra influence of greed, of profit at any cost. Go ahead, Luis.
Alright. I was gonna say that.
Then just say it.
No, I know it's
You were gonna say it or you're gonna say it?
I'm gonna say it.
Okay, then just say it.
That the children were the driving force to capitalism, which benefited big businesses.
How does each child look up here? Yeah, of course, scared, tiny, malnourished. Good. What else though?
Terrified.
Sure. What else? Young. Sure.
White.
Yes.
Isn't that one
Sure.
Tired.
They're all replaceable. They're all doing the exact same thing. They're all just rowing a boat. So if one of them falls off, what do? Just get another child.
What's it?
Right? And I think it's obvious when you look at the color difference. That this guy is big and it's bright red and green, and back here it's just gray tones into darkness.
That kid.
Some of you asked what the top said. It says child labor investigators and sentimentalists, like journalists that want to make us feel bad for people, charities, organizations, and all other keep out. So if you got something to do with, just let us mind our own business. Laissez-faire economics. Leave us alone.
Mister.
What's up?
Is that child dead?
Probably.
Oh.
Sucks to suck. Alternate lights, please. So even
Looks like he had a fun time.
alternate lights, please. Even in this dynamic. Oh God, you're fine. We have this idea that further exploits workers, and I'll go a little more in a minute, called company towns. I want you to make a connection to something else in this case. Okay. The example here from the Do Now on Thursday about the Pullmans. and they live in a Pullman house, they're born in a Pullman whatever, they're going to be buried in a Pullman grave, they're going to buy their stuff at a Pullman store. So in this scenario, imagine me as the business owner, yes? And you're all the workers, just for the analogy, okay? So who pays you? You. I do, right? But then who do you pay your rent to? You. Me. Who do you pay who do you buy your groceries from? You. Who do you get your health care from? You. Okay. So in this case, you're going to live by my schedule, in my housing, buying your stuff and whatever I want to provide at my store, and at the very end of it, like whatever money you might have left is yours. What system is this similar to? If you don't get this right, just know that Roswell got it right in first period, so you should feel bad about yourself. What system does this resemble? No? Sharecropping. It's 100% like it's industrial sharecropping. That you are living by my terms. You work for me. I control your living conditions, your groceries, your health care, everything else. The company that does this the most is Pullman. And we'll talk about the effect of this on one of the bigger strikes in American history towards the end of class. But the effect of this is definitely an increase in profits. Carnegie Steel, Rockefeller Oil, every business decision is being made through the lens of profitability. But on the backside of that, the ultimate result is a ton of labor unrest. Or, like today in LA, strikes. Take a look at the map. Where do you see the most, all the counties that are this color experienced strikes between 1870 and 1900? Where are most of the major strikes taking place? In the Northeast and the Midwest. What I called on Thursday the
industrial,
The oil belt?
Iron Belt. The Iron Belt, yeah. That through this part of the world is where the most industrialization is taking place and where the most, therefore, strikes are also taking place. Most of the strikes are happening in the West, or what kind of strikes do you guys think? These strikes. Who are the workers that are striking out here? No? What kinds of work is being done out in the West that would require striking? Mining and farming. Yeah. A lot of mine strikes here with gold and silver mines. Farm strikes here, whereas this is much more like factory strikes. Okay? So let's take a look at why there's such conflict between the two sides. How the two sides view the exact same scenarios in a different way. So on this side, I have labor. So looking at this, pretend for a minute that you are in the laboring class in the Gilded Age, and you're going to look at the exact same scenarios as if you were a worker. Now, because of industrialization, because of mass production, because of the lack of skilled labor, you feel that your labor has become devalued. Back to my point about Chris and his steering wheel. Chris, who used to make a car, now puts a steering wheel in a car. He thinks his work has become devalued, less valuable. Question for you guys. Has it? Yeah. Kevin, you agree? Good chat. So, because of all of these processes, our labor itself is less valuable. Now, put a different hat on. Look at this from a management perspective. Over here, because of the same things, rise of industry, rise of production, lack of skilled workers, we have more money. Are both things true? Yeah. Take a minute. Eyes out for me, please. Is this true for labor? Has it become less valuable for the exact same reasons why profit is higher? Which side is right? What do you guys think? In this scenario, which side is right? Is labor right for wanting to have their labor be more valuable? Or is management right for wanting to make more money?
I would say
Talk to your partner. Take 30 seconds. What do you think? Make an argument. Which one is more valuable and why? Which one's right? Let me stop you guys here. I heard a real good argument. I heard from both Brett and Eliam that from a moral perspective, from a moral argument, these guys are right. But from an economic argument, these guys are right. So the point isn't who's right or wrong. It's a matter of like how you want to view our economy, how you want to view our world. If you think people deserve a working wage, a living wage for their work, here. If you think the primary object in the world is to make more money, then this is the right point of view. But we have to understand that for the exact same set of circumstances, the two sides are categorically different in terms of how they view those circumstances. Vice versa, the workforce sees terrible working conditions, they see immigrants, they see their lack of money, and they're very upset as a workforce because they feel like they have no way to get up in the world. For the exact same set of circumstances, hey, you know what? Working conditions suck, but so what? Immigrants are here, awesome. They make my work more replaceable. I'm not paying anybody anything, that's great. Guess what? Profits are higher. So again, for the exact same argument, for the same set of circumstances, you have two different views on what's taking place. And the big takeaway here is that the two sides view the exact same issue, one as a success, one as a defeat, and that's going to create a ton of conflict. Back to my do now quote, this is where the government, according to that quote, should step in and regulate so that both sides can win. They can have more profit, but they can get paid a living wage, but the government's not going to do that. So the big move that labor is going to take is to create unions. That's their move. That's their response. That's their tool, their weapon, so to speak, to collectively bargain. So that's a very important phrase for today, collective bargaining. What does collective mean? Together, we, as a unit. What is bargaining? It's to negotiate. So, for a right now, today example, Eliab comes to me, he's like, hey, Winch, I'll be honest with you, man, like you give way too much homework. What do I tell Eliab? Who? Oh, Ellie, oh yeah, that's right, you're in my third grade English class, aren't you? Cool, good story, beat it. But what if, try this on for size, what if all 30 of you came to me like, hey, Winchell, we got a problem. Like, we've been trying our best to keep up, we've been putting in all of our effort, but it's just too much, we can't keep up. We respectfully ask you to decrease the homework. What will I tell you?
You'll consider it.
I might consider it. I'll probably still tell you no to go to hell. But there's a little more power behind you coming as a unit collectively than one person complaining. Likewise, in my factory, Noé comes to me and he's like, hey man, I deserve a raise. And I was like, cool man, good luck at the unemployment line. How's that raise working out for you? Oh, now you don't have a job. Whereas the thinking of labor is they're saying they can't replace all of us. What if we all, I tell you guys are the curve for the test. What if we all fail it? But what if I can replace all of you? What if you actually don't matter? What if you are that replaceable? So the argument here is that they're going to collectively bargain for more money, more salaries. They're going to do so by striking, by picketing, by asking for political help, by appealing eventually largely to the Democratic Party. Because, of course, Republicans are going to side with these guys, because Republicans in this time period are for big business. And on the other side of things, management plays this really smart. They say, oh, cool, you guys are going to go on strike? Good for you. Guess what? You're not on strike anymore. You are now locked out. I am locking you out of work until you decide you're coming back on my demands. Because I am rich and you are not. And it doesn't matter how long you go on strike, I can survive it economically, you can't. Back to my point on Wednesday about Rockefeller. Like, as he tries to buy out his competitors. If his competitors don't want to sell out to him, he'll just wait and drop his prices until they can't compete anymore. Because he's richer than them and he can afford it. So, okay, cool, you want to go on strike? How long can you guys survive without money? A week? Maybe 2? Good for you. I don't need your money. I can wait a year.
Is it like the government shutdown? They're just waiting. Trump's waiting out for everything.
Kind of, but it's a different conversation.
Yeah.
Management will lock you out. Management will hire scabs or replacement workers immediately. They'll just replace your work until you decide you want to come back to work. They'll create blacklists of union leaders to not get hired. People that are trying to start unions in factories. They'll make their workers sign called yellow dog contracts. Or contracts where you get the job where you sign it and say, I will not join a union while I work here. Well, the contract says you can't be in a union, sorry. And worst case scenario, to the point a lot of you guys made in the do now, using the government. Using the army or hiring a private military force called the Pinkertons to use violence to force workers back to work. Or use the Supreme Court to make rulings that forces workers back to work. So moral of the story, because government's going to side over here, doesn't matter what these guys want to do, they're not going to have a ton of impact. Kind of sucks. Now the two major unions in this time period are the Knights of Labor, founded by Terence Howderly. That's a good name. In 1869. So it's actually a really, really early union. 1869. It's the very beginning of this Gilded Age. Now what's unique about them is they're, for the most part, they're going to be open to almost everybody. Immigrant labor, black labor, women labor, Catholic labor, unskilled labor, skilled labor. If you are a worker in America, for the most part, the Knights of Labor will take you. And they're asking for things like largely the 8-hour workday. They want to work an 8-hour day. They think 10 to 12 hours is too long. They're going to be antitrust, anti-monopoly, and their big tactics are arbitration, which is a third-party negotiation. It's a very common used tactic by unions. Arbitration is basically if I'm the business and you guys are the union, who do you pick to come? Who would you pick as your representative in this class?
You.
I'm management.
I'll choose. Yeah, me.
Okay, you guys are never gonna agree. So you guys pick Luis, and he comes to negotiate with me as ownership, and we'll bring in a third-party arbitrator who doesn't work with us or for us, who will hear both sides and decide what's best. Or strikes. The big difference I want you to be aware of, though, if you could just understand this one thing, is the AFL is more about skilled workers. Workers with a craft, mechanics, and the like. Like today, skilled workers are considered like mechanics, plumbers, electricians, that type of manual labor that requires skill and training. And they're founded and headed by a man named Samuel Gompers. It's a cool name. I like to say that. Gompers. You should try it. Gompers. Like the school. There's a Gompers school somewhat close by. I think for him. And they're more of the bread and butter union. Same thing. They're asking for more money, the living necessities. More money, safer working conditions, shorter hours, the usual. And they're going to take the same kind of tactics, arbitration and strikes, but eventually, late in the Gilded Age, they're going to start political lobbying with the Democrats. So lobbying is like asking for political help in exchange for political support. So if all of you are in a labor union, and we all as a labor union tell the Democratic Party, hey, if you support our cause and start regulating these businesses, we'll all vote for your Democratic candidate. So kind of asking for political support this way. Using their numbers instead of for economic support, for political support.
Kind of similar to the political machine.
Kind of, but it'll be a little different. Because it's not trading, there's no job being traded or corruption being traded. The union is just saying, as a unit, we'll support the party that gives us. Yeah, so you're right about the political machine comparison, but it's much more so on the up and up, and it's more so like voting intelligently as a block. Cool? Cool. So their goals are pretty similar, and they both want an 8-hour workday, they want better working conditions, they want more money. But their goals differ slightly in terms of who they want to better support them. Now, as you can see, from the 1890s on, we see a huge increase in labor unions. So throughout this time period in the 1920s, and we see our labor unions really having their heyday, their peak, which we'll talk about in class, in the 1930s and 40s. In the 1950s, the Republicans, we'll talk about this after World War II, are going to take away some significant accomplishments of labor unions. And labor unions have never since had their influence that they had in this time period. Another name to know is Mother Jones. I don't know why she's called that, because her name is actually Mary Harris. But you know what? We're here to judge anybody. Mary Harris is a labor organizer for the United Mine Workers, obviously a mine labor union. She's later going to get involved in some socialist activities, founding the Social Democratic Party in 1898. And she is one of the founding members of the IWW, or the International Workers of the World, in 1905. Now I'm going to ask you to know them because they're the most extreme of the labor unions. They're the most aggressive. They're led by Bill Haywood, and they're an international organization because it's in their freaking name. Well, they're the Industrial Workers of the World. They're going to appeal to workers in Europe. They're going to appeal to workers across the political spectrum, at the very bottom of classes. That very bottom of society that Henry George is pointing out in Progress and Poverty. They're going to try to appeal to them. And their big difference, they also want a shorter workday. They also want better working conditions. They also want more money. But their big difference is they want to overthrow capitalism. They believe that violence, if necessary, is justified to overthrow capitalism and put the means of production, so factories and all the money, in the hands of the working class. So they're much more of an aggressively socialist organization that wants to have a violent revolution and overthrow the fact that all the money's at the top. Intriguing. So you have a really good speech next by Samuel Gompers, our friend. And I want you to read it quickly as if it was being spoken, because it is a speech being delivered politically. And he's going to make a pretty compelling argument for why workers want 8 hours. How many of you guys want less homework? Raise your hand. Cool. Chavez, why?
Because when I procrastinate and do it at 12, it takes energy.
Oh, that's not a personal problem. Excellent. Brett, why do you want less homework? It's irrelevant.
What?
My homework is irrelevant?
Not your homework.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough.
Oh, you're talking about just in this class?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, to be honest. Christoph, why do you want less homework? So I can sleep more. Okay. So none of you have made a good argument. Brett's argument's kind of good. So these workers are asking for an 8-hour workday, and Gompers is going to tell you why. So I'm going to give you just 6. You read it. I want you to read it quickly. But what problems in society does he think comes from overworking these workers? How does he think a shorter workday is better for society as a whole? And what arguments does he use against a longer workday? So it's a good speech. I think it's very easy to understand. He's giving this speech in public, advocating for his people. So take 6. I'll give you 6:30. Read it, answer my questions, and I'll let you guys talk about with your partner what his arguments are anti-long workday. Go for it. You both go. Take it. Nixon. Read it, read it, read it. or so minutes left. What are his arguments against the long workday? Why do you think it's a good thing for society to shorten individuals' work? Oh, 45 or so seconds left. I'll let you guys talk about what his argument is. How does he justify shortening the workday? Wrap up 20 or so more seconds. You don't feel like it?
Oh, my wrist hurts.
Your wrist hurts? I don't know why. All right. Take a minute. Talk to your partner in just a quick minute, please. We can wrap up strong today. Why? How does he argue for a shorter workday? Do they just not want to work so much? What are some of his reasons why a shorter workday would be good for society? 1 minute, go. Chat me out. Yeah. I'm part of it. How can I better society? How can I better myself? Yeah. That's enough afterwards with Oreos. Man, they show my hands, I'm talking about cereal. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, and 1. So, I've heard from today. Let me hear from Ash. Ash, what is the general argument he's making for a shorter workday? Yeah! How can these workers ever better themselves? How can these workers ever accomplish the American dream if all they have to do in life is work? How can you better yourself? How can you better your society? Does he make a pretty similar argument to Henry George? What do you guys think? Yeah, in terms of like at the end of George, when George is like, if we don't fix this, then eventually it's all going to be toppled, right? Good. What else does he have to say about the working class, Johnny?
Well, that they well, what Travis told me was that they live to work, but that's it.
I love it. They work to live. They work just to survive instead of living to work. All right, they work just to live day to day, as opposed to living to also then work. Talk to me. Louder.
He makes a point where he said that if they have less working hours, they will go to theater or concert, and therefore business opportunities because of that rise.
Good point. That if they have more leisure time and more money, they'll use that time like spending money to support other businesses. What a concept. What a concept. Huh. So, unfortunately, the general industrial class doesn't care. And despite these 4 pretty important strikes, I'll talk about real quick, really quickly, turn your page. Despite these 4 strikes, nothing really changes. Early on, one of our first big strikes is a long one. Check it out. Starts on my birthday in 1877. There you go. It lasts, same year too. Yeah, the day I was actually born. Yeah, it was 110 years before I was born. Thank you. I'm all of 31. But it's not just one place. It's railroad workers across one specific railroad, the Baltimore-Ohio line, across 4 different areas of the railroad. They're all going to strike at the same time. And as you guys know, the railroad is the real driving force, no pun intended, of the rest of the industrial growth of the time period. So you're not just stopping the railroad, you're stopping steel trade, oil trade, etc. by shutting down this one big railroad. It's caused by 2 things. One is the Panic of 1873, which we've already talked about to a smaller extent. We'll talk about it more in a couple lectures. And when the economy went down, they cut these people's their wages, they cut their pay without their consent. Right? They should have worked one day, like, you get paid less money now. Well, I already made not enough money, now I make less. So they all went on strike. What I want you to understand here, though, is that our new who's president in 77? Who had just taken the presidency in 77? Hayes. Yeah, because of the compromise in 77. So Rutherford B. Hayes, our boy, he sends the federal army to put down this strike. An early example of the federal government siding against labor and with business, forcing these workers to go back to work. We see after this a lot of legislation or laws being passed that make it harder for labor unions to do their thing. There's riots and massacres on both sides, the army versus the troops. The army versus the strikers. So the big moral of the story, though, is that the government sides with business. That's all I want you to know about this and the fact that the railroad strike in 77. A couple years later, 9 years later, we have a huge protest planned for May Day, which to this day is still a celebrated holiday on May 1st, which celebrates the working class. Of course, we don't get it off because, never mind. And it's a strike of harvesting workers that are trying to strike in Chicago. Unfortunately, their strike is then kind of co-opted or taken over by anarchists. There's a police riot, anarchists throw a pipe bomb. The pipe bomb kills a bunch of cops. The cops kill a bunch of people in the crowd. But what happens instead is labor unions lose credibility because then they're associated with anarchists that are anti-society functioning at all. So the problem is when you have a nice big strike or demonstration planned and somebody gets violent, who gets blamed? The whole group. The whole group, right? It's one of the reasons why all those protests that were happening during Trump's inaugural, where some of the Democratic protesters got violent and destroyed property, makes the whole group look bad. Makes the whole group look bad. There was a trial. 8 innocent anarchists were convicted of murder in a very quick trial. 4 of them were hanged. 1 committed suicide. So it's just another example of government siding against the laboring class. One of the more famous examples that I would strongly suggest you know, because if ever there's a time in which you need to use some evidence about this, you could just throw in the Homestead Strike, because it's probably the most commonly known one. The Homestead Strike is against U.S. Steel, against the Homestead Steel plant owned by who? Carnegie. Yeah. So Carnegie's actually in Scotland at the time, but the plant is managed by Henry Frick. Henry Frick is a giant asshole.
He's a freak.
Frickin' asshole, yeah. And Frick actually gets shot by a labor activist, and he survives. He's one of those guys that just won't die. Not like Henry Clay. If Henry Clay got shot, he would have just died. And when steel prices go down, he just cuts the workers' wages a ton. He cuts them in half. Oh, you used to make $1 a day, now you make 50 cents. Because every decision is pursued through profit. Bless you.
Bless you.
So these guys go on strike. They walk out of the plant, and you don't mess with Frick because he's a freaking asshole. And Frick says, no, you're not on strike. I'll lock you out until you decide you want to come back to work. So he locks them out and hires scabs or replacement workers, but the workers take control of the plant and won't let the workers in. So it's this huge violent confrontation. Frick then hires the Pinkerton detectives as a private police force that will come enforce any law you want. The Pinkertons come to take control of the plant, and they won't let them in either. There's an armed conflict between the two sides, and eventually the Pennsylvania state militia comes and forces the workers back to work on Frick's conditions. Another example, though, of the government siding with big business and using the military to do so at the expense of the laboring class. What this does, though, is it weakens the steelworkers union because they're forced to go back to work on somebody else's conditions, showing that even a strong union like this, that all walk out of a huge steel plant, really has no bargaining ability. And the final one to know is the Pullman Strike. We already talked about the Pullman Group. Now, the Pullman Strike sucks, because I already gave you this analogy where you guys are all paying me rent, yes? That's the Pullman situation, it's the Pullman town. So, in 1894, because of the next panic, 1893, Pullman, his company, cuts wages. But he doesn't cut the rent or the cost of everything else that he controls. So I'm going to cut how much money you make, but I also control your expenses. I'm not going to cut those down at all. The workers get mad, as they should. They refuse to work. Not just that, they block any transport of the Pullman rail cars. They make rail cars. For railroad, yes? So they block any transport, and it's a longer strike. It's organized by Eugene Debs, a very important name going forward in labor unions. We'll read about him a lot in the next couple units. Debs, he goes to jail during World War I for criticizing the government. He runs for president from jail. He actually gets some votes. It's kind of cool. So he organizes this strike. They're blocking the transport of all Pullman cars. The whole train organization is being shut down because there's no cars. It's complicated. And what the federal government does, it's pretty sneaky. What the federal government does is they attach mail cars to the Pullman cars. Not like dude mail, like passing out like the federal government, the post system. So they attach mail cars to the Pullman cars, and then they say to the workers, you cannot do this because now you're stopping the federal government's obligation to deliver the mail. And then they use the Interstate Commerce Act that I talked about on Thursday that was supposed to regulate railroads, and they use it instead to regulate the union and say, sorry, your union is getting in the way of interstate commerce. You can't be on strike. Wow. Another example of a law that's passed with good intentions, but that ends up biting labor in the ass. So all of these examples, as a court case in read Debs, the court case rules, yeah, sorry, the government was right to make you go back to work because you were stopping the delivery of mail, which the government has to guarantee. In this case, it was President Grover Cleveland in his second term who sends, again, federal troops to enforce now the Postal Service. Sneaky by the government. Actually by Pullman. So sneaky. So all these court cases, they're just good to have in your back pocket for evidence. But what they all share is the fact that the government at each single time is going to side with big business over with the working class. We don't see a president side against business until Teddy Roosevelt in the 1900s. So go ahead, if you could be so kind, and skip these two perspectives on labor. We'll skip it for today, but I still suggest you read it. It shows the conflict between labor and capital. Brett's not going to read it, but hopefully might. We'll see. Until the binders do. So we only have a couple minutes left, but I would, again, strongly suggest you read this. Big picture, what I want you to understand for that next question, yeah, underneath the text, skip the text, is that the government is going to support big business at every single turn. And big business is going to make it as hard as possible for labor unions to have any authority. By limiting how much unions can be in their factories, by limiting who can join a union, by not hiring union workers, big business and government is not going to organize specifically together. They're going to have shared goals of being pro-business. It's going to take several decades for unions to have any authority, and that's not going to happen until the Great Depression. Here's a great cartoon that is trying to portray all these labor unions as just being played by anarchists and socialists. Right? This is the perspective the government's going to use and business is going to use to argue that unions aren't American and you shouldn't join them. Now, the last two ways that big business is going to justify this are two terms that I'm going to ask you to know. The first is social Darwinism. Now, what is general Darwinism? What? Evolution. Why do you evolve? To survive. Right? You evolve to fit the circumstances around you, or you die. That's what Darwin found in his studies on the finches, on other animals in the Galapagos, that it's survival of the fittest. The most fit survive. Now, social Darwinism is this argument that we shouldn't help poor people because they're poor for a reason. If we help them, we are artificially supporting the lowest part of our society, and therefore, we are helping our society not evolve, but devolve, go backwards. If we support the lowest class, the argument stands, then you're actually artificially supporting somebody that shouldn't be surviving anyway. Therefore, laissez-faire economics, the rich are the rich because they're the most fit, the poor are poor because they're the least fit, and that's just the way it works. Yeah? And this is backed by laissez-faire economics, by racism, by anti-immigrant nativism, and this belief that if you work hard enough, you'll just be successful, which time and time again is proved not to be true. The last justification comes from Carnegie, and it comes from an essay he wrote titled Wealth. And I told you guys on Thursday, how much money of his did he give away? Basically all of it. But did he give it to people? No, and this is the gospel of wealth. All revenue generated beyond your own needs should be used for the good of the community. So let me explain how this works. Carnegie is going to argue that, hey, I'm rich because I worked my ass off and I took care of it. My workers suck. They're replaceable. What special skill do they have that deserves more money? But what he's going to do is, who's he going to donate his money to? Charity. What else?
Education.
Colleges, opportunities, libraries, resources, scholarships. The way to look at the gospel of wealth is Carnegie saying, I'm not going to give anybody a handout. Because social Darwinism says that's not good. You're just supporting somebody who doesn't deserve, quote unquote, to be supported. But what I will do is I will give money so people have opportunities. If I'm here in society, I'm not going to pull somebody up because that's artificially messing with social Darwinism. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down a ladder if they want to climb. What's that ladder? Education, opportunities, access, libraries, knowledge. So he's going to donate this money so that people can improve themselves if they so choose. People can improve their own outlook on life if they pursue it themselves. So this is the way Carnegie justifies his treatment, and what he does with it is all kinds of really, really good things for society, but why did he get that rich? Because of corruption and treating his workers so bad. So that's his justification. All right, nicely done today. Let me pass out your chapter that is due on Thursday. Daniel, can you stop it, please? Stop it. Stop.